Does the West go all in? A third day of oft-broken ceasefire promises in Ukraine clearly illustrates that Russia's gone all in and won't settle for anything short of victory on the battlefield. We'll ask about the latest out of the crucial port cities of Odessa and Mariupol, and talk of Poland sending Soviet-era fighter jets to its under-siege neighbour. Beyond control of Ukrainian airspace, there's the control of money flows, with a US-led push to cut credit and credit cards to Russia. And now Washington's call to cut imports of Russian oil and gas. It can't be done on a dime. Can Europeans, in fact, do it at all, more broadly? As gas and bread prices soar, how much pain and sacrifice are citizens here in the West willing to take? Vladimir Putin's betting that they're soft and can't tough it out when prices rise and supply chains get disrupted. Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the spillover effect of the war in Ukraine. Joining us, retired General Jean-Paul Paloméros, former French Air Force Chief of Staff, former Senior Commanding Officer at NATO Allied Command. Thank you for being with us.
Good afternoon.
Thanks as well to French Member of Parliament Anne Gente from Emmanuel Macron's La République En Marche party. You represent the French abroad. In fact, your home constituency includes Russia and Ukraine.
And also Moldavia, and also Belarus, and also the whole of Asia,
All right.
down to New Zealand.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Thanks as well to attorney Olivier Dorgans of the international law firm Hughes, Hubbard and Reed. Your remit is looking at sanctions and
yes,
whether they
that's
work
exactly
or
what
not.
I do.
Thanks for being with us. And from Warsaw, we welcome back Marcin Zaborowski, Policy Director at the Future of Security Program of the think tank GlobeSec. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you can weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, day 12 of a war that's already triggered the biggest mass exodus Europe has seen since the Second World War. Ukraine's major cities bracing for more overnight bombardment amid fighting on multiple fronts. Earlier, France 24 senior correspondent Cyril Payen went to the front line just outside of the capital.
From Kyiv, we drive southbound to the areas that were struck by the first bombs over 2 weeks ago. Vasilkiv is a garrison town, a strategic target for the Russian forces.
Voici l'impact très concret depuis l'invasion militaire de la Russie. Voici un tir de missile sur cette ville satellitaire à 40 km sud de Kiev. Ce bâtiment est totalement détruit par ce missile, une violence inouïe et tue une école. Il y a d'ailleurs encore autour de nous des cahiers d'écoliers, des vêtements et même un goûter d'écoliers qui est encore resté là et qui montre bien la violence qui a pu frapper cet établissement.
I think about my friend who studied here. I think about this old man who were here in office in charge. It's so terrible for all those people. And the children who were here.
At Vasilkiv's city hall, volunteers and soldiers work 24/7. And in its basement, more than 100 people have taken refuge. Ludmila used to be a teacher at the bombed school. Now she takes care of families here.
Do you think that at some point you will have to leave the city? What is your guess about the future?
No. No, we stay here. It's our city, we cannot leave. Why? From where? And where we should go? The people that stay here, they decided for themselves that they stay here. And we shouldn't go anywhere. We will fight, we will find decisions, we will find, ways. Nobody have dubs.
We've been here for 4 days, without going outside. Last night was quite calm. It was okay.
This small Ukrainian town highlights both Russia's relentless advances as well as the local population's determination to resist.
Yeah, and they were bracing for another night of shelling. Let me ask you, General Paloméros, we've been looking at, it's day 12. We've been looking at maps today, and we see that the Russian advance is still, for now, stalling outside of the major cities. Is that a tactic or a setback?
They are bracing themselves. The time is working for them. They are besieging a lot of towns. So they just can build their forces and select their moment, the time when they want really to strike. One big concern, strategically speaking, is about the south and Odessa mainly, because I think this is one of the main push that Putin want to do, because it will be for his side a great success, a great strategic success if he can isolate Ukraine from the Black Sea.
If we look at that map, though, we see that there is Kherson, which has not yet fallen completely, although most of it has. But there's at least 2 other cities on the way to Odessa. Earlier, we spoke with a member of the Odessa City Council who said it'll be a long while before the Russian troops are there. Is he being optimistic?
Hopefully, it is the optimism of the will, and that's good to hear. But the Russian can as well launch some massive attack from the sea. So they can use cruise missiles and bombs and shelling from the sea. They have the sovereignty on the sea, if I may say so, supremacy on the sea.
The Pentagon this Monday saying that Russia has already deployed nearly 100% of those massive troop buildup that they had surrounding Ukraine. Is that something you've seen, or is that wishful thinking as well?
Well, we can trust our American friends. They have said that for a while, so they are very trustful, but they can provide some reserve or something like that. But there is a cost for them to pay, for sure, to invade Ukraine and to keep Ukraine. It would be even more difficult.
Because how many men would they need? We were talking, what, about 150,000 before?
Yes, perhaps more than that if they want really to stay.
Right, and then at some time or another you have to relieve them. It's a lot. It's big manpower. And in the last hours, Angente, the French government urging the last remaining French citizens in Ukraine to leave. How many are still left?
About 300 of them. A couple of them, maybe a few dozens of them, are just on their way to the frontier, either from Poland or Romania. And they were asked, even in Odessa, they were asked to move to Moldavia as quickly as they could when the roads are approximately free of any safe, I would say, of any attack, any bombing. So they have to leave now the country, after which it will be quite hard for France to help them, to give them any kind of support, to help them leave the place where they are, to move to a neighboring country.
What are constituents telling your office right now?
For those of them who live there, who have decided to stay in Ukraine, just because half of their family, maybe their partner or husband or wife is from Ukraine, and they do not want to leave. They have their life there, their family, their friends. It's quite hard for them. And for those who leave, they're so sad and also so upset with what is going on, feeling that Ukraine has been, in a sense, abandoned. And because they were, as I was there last July, and they were already requesting us, please accept that we join Europe now. They were very much in a hurry. But of course, they had many obstacles before they could join Europe. But they are really worried about what is going on, and they definitely do not want to become Russian.
They definitely don't want to become Russian. Again, it's what we were just discussing with the general, that it's one thing to take these towns. It's another to keep them. We can show images from southern Ukraine on the road to the Crimean Peninsula. Russian soldiers firing into the air this Monday to disperse a group of residents which were protesting the Russian capturing of their city, Chaplinka. Your reaction, Angente, to those images?
Yes, I can confirm, and I was there, that the feeling of belonging to a nation as a Ukraine nation was really strong, and something that Mr. Putin has lost is the impact of the Russian impact within Ukraine. Clearly, we remember that about 8 years ago, 50% of the Ukrainian population was split between would I go rather on the European side or on the Russian side. But clearly today, it has completely changed, and the vast majority of Ukrainians who want to be on the European side, Mr. Putin has lost his impact on the Ukrainian nation.
Just a word on French nationals living in Russia. What's it like for them right now?
Daily life is very complicated. We had about less than 5,000 of French nationals there. I have also to say that France is the first foreign investor and first foreign employer in Russia. We have about 160,000 Russian citizens working in French companies. So for them, the daily life is quite tough. Shortly, they could be cut off from the internet connection, meaning no communication with their families. Paying their daily bills is very complicated. The French school so far is closed because of school holidays, but it's quite tough to find just the teachers who have lots of difficulties to fly back to Russia. So daily life is complicated, and they were asked, for those of them who are not essential to remain in Moscow, they were asked to leave Russia as quickly as they could before Russia was completely locked down.
Olivier Dorcans, we're going to talk in a moment about the consequences of what Anjente was talking about. Visa, for instance, saying it was no longer doing business in Russia, what that means for ordinary citizens, be they Russians or foreigners. But first, I want to ask Marcin Zaborowski about whether in the capital Warsaw, which is obviously not near the border, you're feeling it, this wave of refugees that are pouring across.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, there has been over 1 million refugees coming to Poland. In fact, yesterday at 8 o'clock, the border guard issued a statement saying that 1 millionth refugee has crossed the border. They come here at the rate of about 100 to 150,000 per day. So that means that today it's over 1 million today. And when you go to the train stations, for example, all the train stations in Warsaw are full of refugees. At the university where I work, you have lots of Ukrainian students, obviously, but also other students from the former Soviet Union. They organize help. So all the ground floor is full, basically, of people packing up clothing and hygiene products and sending out staff to the distribution centers. There has been a sanitation problem at Warsaw train stations. They had to make a lot of makeshift arrangements just to accommodate for these masses of people, really. And a lot of my friends are basically hosting families on daily basis. So a lot of people have, if they have some summer houses, they are giving them to the refugees. So I don't really know a family that wouldn't make some kind of a engagement, a gesture, or be involved, very often directly.
Very, very often directly, and at the same time, your thoughts on how people in Poland see this. You just heard Anjente mention that when she was there last summer, the locals in Ukraine were pleading with them for EU membership to be accepted. I know this Monday, Brussels said it would begin to consider EU membership for Ukraine, Moldova, and also for Georgia. Your thoughts on how shocked everyone is about how this is all unwinded so fast?
Well, I don't think we've been very shocked. I mean, we actually always, being very close to the former Soviet space, we had no illusions about Russian belligerence. And, after all, Russia invaded Ukraine 8 years ago in 2014. And ever since it actually staged a separatist presence in Donbass and Lugansk. So there was, from the Polish point of view, there was always more like a expectation that it was a matter of time, really, before a fuller invasion would take place. As for the perceptions in Poland on Ukrainian application to join the European Union, I mean, they are positive, and the president of Poland was the first one actually to call for it and state full support for that. And all of the new member states, presidents of countries we joined the EU after 2004, they signed up to the support for Ukraine joining the EU as soon as possible, as soon as under the obviously very difficult circumstances.
Right. Whether or not that can become a reality anytime soon is a different matter. By the way, Poland's deputy foreign minister this Monday once again insisting that Polish planes will not be flying over Ukraine, but the incessant ballet of aircraft landing at this NATO base in Poland shows just how much the Atlantic Alliance is supporting Kyiv with humanitarian aid and also with weapons.
I authorized allies to provide U.S. origin defense equipment to our Ukrainian partners. Lithuania stepped up with Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, M72 light anti-tank weapons, and other supplies to help the extraordinarily courageous Ukrainian people defend their country from Russian aggression.
The U.S. Secretary of State speaking there in Vilnius. He was also in neighboring Latvia this Monday. One question that was asked earlier was, okay, so officially the NATO is not at war with Russia, but when you have this amount of weapons going in a way, is NATO already at war with Moscow?
You should ask the Russians. They are selling a lot of weapons around the world, so they are not at war around the world. So it's a kind of a way to support Ukrainian. There are not many ways to support Ukrainian. The Ukrainians are very alone in this fight. So providing them the weapons is the maximum and the minimum that the Western countries can do.
And this idea floated over the weekend that Poland would ship over Soviet-era jets it has and get some F-16s from the Americans. Is that feasible?
Well, that's very easy here on the table, but when you think what it means, it's a different story. There is a benefit-risk assessment to make because provided that Poland agreed to provide those jets, MiG-29 to say, then they will have to be piloted by Ukrainian pilots. So where are they? They are still current on flying on those aircraft first, but secondly and more importantly, you have to fly from Poland to Ukraine. And then suddenly you cross the border. And as the Russians are mastering, all in all, the Ukrainian sky, then you can become a fighter, a warrior. And then Mr. Putin can claim that NATO is attacking Russian forces and that NATO is involved in the war.
It's not happening, is what you're saying.
Well, it must be carefully balanced. And what is the benefit at the end of the day? Can we really rebuild a Ukrainian air power? I have some doubt because I know what it takes to build a solid and credible air power.
And right now, is it supremacy on the part of the Russians in the skies over Ukraine, or
No,
still?
because there is a lot of air defense, very effective. We have seen that happening, which is a good news for the Ukrainian. But they are located on the specific points, on the center of gravity, on the strategic objectives. They cannot be anywhere. So yes, all in all, the Russians have the superiority. I wouldn't call that supremacy, but the superiority.
Marcin Zaborowski, do you agree with General Palomeros that sending those old MiGs across the border to Ukraine is basically a non-starter?
I'm not sure it's a no-starter, but it is. I agree that it is very risky. And all the official communication that you get from the Polish side at this point in time is a denial. So what the Poles are saying that that Polish MiGs will not fight in Ukraine, and the General Staff has also issued a statement saying that all the MiGs remain at the Polish airports, and there are no plans of shipping them anywhere else. So. It's really what you are referring to at this point in time remains media speculation, and based to some extent also on what we heard from the U.S. sources. Secretary of State Blinken did sort of say that there are negotiations with Poland on replacing MiGs with F-16, but as I said, the Poles are very careful not to be perceived as being a part of this conflict.
All right, and if giving planes to Ukraine does get the green light, the question is, as you were saying, how to get them across the border. And also, it's not just Poland that's involved in all of this. The Kremlin has its antenna up. Let's listen.
Practically all of Kyiv's air force has been destroyed. But we know for a fact about Ukrainian warplanes flying over to Romania and other neighboring countries, using the airfield network of those countries to harbor Ukrainian combat planes, with subsequent use against Russian armed forces may be evaluated as those countries engaging in the military conflict.
Is that true about flying over to Romania, General Palomares?
I have no information that that's a possibility, because that's what I would do if I was them. But again, we come back to this question: flying from Romania, flying from NATO airspace into Ukrainian space could be seen as an aggressive movement by the Russian. At least an alibi to say that.
France has sent troops to Romania to bolster the country there. Angente, your thoughts when you heard there the Russian chief of staff?
No information about whether there could be some flight from Romania into the Ukraine country. But here again, any move from a NATO member into this conflict would be an escalation for which the damage to the Ukrainian people would be worse than what they are having now. So we have to keep this in mind. We are not part of the conflict. We are not at war with Russia. None of us, whether in a member of NATO, any member of the European Union. And we have to keep it as such, because any escalation, again, would be worse for the Ukrainian people.
What if there's Ukrainian forces that are being chased by Russians across a NATO border? It looks like it could spiral very easily.
Yes, that's why we have to be very cautious with any move. That is the reason why also our own president has sent a message to our troops about 2 weeks ago, asking them to be very cautious that they could be facing some kind of provocation in any other theater, not only there, but in any other theater where our troops are in the world. So they have to be very cautious and should not respond in any matter to any kind of provocation.
All right, the Ukrainians have been, ever since the shooting began, begging for NATO to impose a no-fly zone like it did for the former Yugoslavia. There, too, Moscow's warning to the alliance is blunt.
It is impossible to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine. It can only be done from neighboring states. But any movement in this direction will be considered as participation in an armed conflict.
Does that end the argument, General Palomares?
Well, there is a lot of cynicism from Mr. Putin. It's not surprising, because he is imposing a no-fly zone, in fact, over a sovereign country, Ukraine. But we are not speaking about no-fly zone. We are speaking about air war. So if any aircraft enter the Ukrainian airspace, that will be a wire. It will be considered as a wire.
And in the former Yugoslavia, it took years, right, for the no-fly zone to come into effect.
Well, Yugoslavia was different. There was a United Nations resolution which imposed a no-fly zone. So that was safe. It was safe. I was there, by the way. That was very safe and very effective. But imposing a no-fly zone is a kind of peacekeeping operation. And there is no peace to keep. Here we have war operations. So any aircraft entering the Ukrainian space is part of the air war and the war at large.
All right, so for now, that is certainly off the table. Of course, what we are seeing, and again, it's this question of how much it spills over, and I'll turn to you on this point, Olivier Dorgans. We have, as we're speaking, the price of gasoline in the United States has topped $4 a gallon. It's the first time since 2008. That's an average price. Here in France, we're now seeing €2 a liter at a lot of petrol stations. We're hearing these calls by the Americans for an end to imports of Russian natural gas and oil. When you look at that, what's your reaction?
My reaction is that it's the natural step in the escalations of economic sanctions that have been imposed by Western countries over the last 12 days now. The approach that was chosen by the US, the EU and the UK has been a scaled approach. So we started to look at Russian oligarchs and some banks which had close tie to the Kremlin. Then we moved into the export of certain goods which are critical to the Russian economy, such as dual-use items or items in the semiconductors industry, for instance. And we added more Russian oligarchs to the list. And then we had a blunt approach about 10 days ago when we decided to not only agree on the de-swifting of certain Russian banks and also the
SWIFT is that international system where you're able to trade financially.
Exactly, that's a communication system that is set up by a corporation in Belgium that is subscribed by over 12,000 members worldwide, and which is the critical to communication between banks.
Russians, by the way, announcing that they're going to join the Chinese one now instead.
Which is in itself surprising because the Russians have also developed their own SWIFT system. They started in 2014 following the first wave of Western sanctions. And it's a sign of weakness that they are looking at the Chinese system. It probably means that the system is not sufficiently robust to be able to process all of the transactions that are critical to the Russian financial economy. And then we took a last wave of sanction which targeted the Russian central bank, in essence depriving the Russian central bank from using its currency reserves abroad, which in itself is a very strong sanctions. And now we're left with the last option on the table, but that option, as you said, has very strong spillover on effects on the European economy mostly. We are highly dependent on Russian import of gas. We are trying to move away from that, and we've made some progress in 2014. That's one of the reasons we've been quite reluctant to go that direction. The US has also been very patient in that sense. The US had urged for these sanctions to be taken earlier, but it's also respectful of its European ally and the UK, and it knows its dependence. But should such measure be taken, which is a likelihood, say, for instance, toward the end of the week at the European summit that is conveyed by President Macron in Versailles, then that would increase the price of gasoline and of Russian gas, which is critical to the European economy.
And so I'll ask you the same question as General Palameos about weapons supplies. And so at what point are you actually a party to the war when you're supporting one side that much? Likewise, when you look at all these measures of sanctions, which are unprecedented, so fast, as you say, does that mean that effectively we're almost at war with Russia?
That's what President Putin was hinting toward the weekend. He was describing this Western sanction as illegitimate, as an act of war.
Is that how you feel?
It's the appropriate response to a very unusual and critical geopolitical situation. I think the approach that has been taken by Western countries has been quite progressive, and it's trying to not hurt its interests, most importantly in the energy sector. But that being said, we know that the energy sector is critical to the Russian economy. It's accounting for more than half of its profits, and as a result, if we want to be credible to our Russian to the Russian government, we need, I believe, to move in that direction, even though it may hurt our economic interests.
And Gente, you were mentioning earlier the several thousand French citizens who live in Russia. Most of them are in business, right?
Yes, they are.
So this means sacrifice, right? If you're going to stare down Vladimir Putin, it means it's going to directly impact, again, your constituents, since you represent the French abroad in Parliament.
Yes, them, but also us living in Europe. Also, that is the reason why the President Macron has called the European Commission to work and make some proposals for this summit that is conveyed next 10th and 11th of March in Versailles, just to think about what kind of resilience plan we could have so that together Europe could absorb the impact and have a response, a financial response regarding energy, the different sectors, also the food sector, and see how we could lower the impact of what is going. It is going to come back as a boomerang, as we were saying, from these sanctions. It could be the next step, but also we have to diversify, and this will take time. However, regarding gas from Russia, we also have to say that we have stocks in Europe, so meaning that this winter should be all right. Now the next step is next summer when we prepare for the next stocks for the next winter. That's when the problems may arise. So that is the reason why we have to think now as Europeans, and that's also something that Mr. Putin has lost. The European unity that was already strong through this pandemic period, now with this war, the European is more united than ever. The European Union is more united than ever, and also maybe with this next coming resilience plan.
But you'll agree we're only 12 days in. The price of petrol rising was what sparked the Yellow Vests movement here in France. Price of at the pump right now is much higher than it was back then.
Right.
Do you feel as though the French are ready to sacrifice? And it's going to be working class people who are going to pay more for their gasoline.
French people have understood that here we are talking about what? About our freedom, about our democracy that is threatened by Mr. Putin. And when you talk about our own freedom, daily freedom, that they were also talking about the Yellow Vest. And our president also has informed them, has already announced, there will be an impact on our daily lives, on the cost of living, on the cost of heating our home, on the cost of the food that we are purchasing weekly. So he has already informed and informed us about that. So I'm sure that just because we know that there is a threat regarding our democracy, our freedom, that most of French people will agree, and there will be also a plan to help them absorb this increase in the plan. We have this tariff shield that we have put in place, and this also will be set up next time. We just need the approval of the European Union to set up the next tariff shield, but I'm sure that we'll get approval from the European Commission.
Marcin Zaborowski, do you agree with Angente that this has brought Europeans closer together, or, again, is it early days?
No, I think we can surely we can agree that the EU reaction, in combination with the UK and with the United States, has been stronger, more coordinated, more persistent, and it has certainly surprised Vladimir Putin. I think that Vladimir Putin expected that at worst, there will be some complications with Nord Stream 2. I think that they never expected that the EU would go as far as to sanction Russia on SWIFT and to pursue further sanctions which are hitting at oligarchs, some of which of who are beginning to rebel and are calling for peace, are calling for negotiations. So it is having an impact, and I think that the EU response has been, robust and resilient.
Is that how you see things, Olivier d'Organs, when it comes to the oligarchs? Are these oligarchs entities in their own right, or are they entirely dependent on the Kremlin?
It's a tough question because the oligarchs have structured their wealth through their proximity with the Russian government, through concessions of public work, for instance, which has allowed them to amass great amount of wealth. And also it should be noted that Vladimir Putin has also changed the circles of oligarchs around him quite a lot over the last few years, also in preparation for these sanctions. And we have a more conservative, close circle of oligarchs around Vladimir Putin than in, say, 5 or 6 years ago, which was a more liberal approach. Yes, there are some oligarchs which are speaking up. For instance, the president of Lukoil, most notably, the second largest Russian company, most publicly said that he was not in favor of the pursuit of the continuation of military actions in Ukraine, which is in itself a very bold statement to make in Russia these days.
Is he soon out of a job?
History will tell. But the question about oligarch is also extremely important in what I would say this war of image we're also having with the Russian state. We are trying to seize assets. We are trying to track down assets, and we are also trying, perhaps as a way to explain what economic sanctions are to the general public, we are trying to also show their impact and what it means. And I think that's a way to perhaps counterbalance the questions, the legitimate question that European voters may have as to the impact of these sanctions on their daily life. So I think that's also one of the reasons someone like Bruno Le Maire, for instance, and other
the French economy
ministers and other economy ministers throughout Europe have also called, as Ursula von der Leyen said, for the creations of task force to allow these assets to be traced, to be tracked down, and to put maximum pressure on the Russian oligarchs as perhaps a way to also shift the opinion of Vladimir Putin.
General Palomeros, during the Cold War, the old Cold War, remember the one with the Soviets, trade was minimal between Russia and the West. Now, as we've been talking, it's very interdependent. Is that the difference between now and then?
Very much so. Perhaps we thought that was there forever, and that this immediacy of the global market, the worldwide global market, was there forever. It appears that it's not the case, and I think it is really the time behind a crisis and opportunity, if I may say so. It is the time for Europe to think about autonomy, strategic autonomy. In those domains, the resource defense, aligned with NATO. I would like to stress that EU and NATO are working very well together on this crisis, which is a very good news. 21 countries, European countries, belong to NATO, EU countries. So, yes, we have to move in that direction. We have to redefine what are the key assets, the key functions, the key capabilities
when you talk about autonomy, are we then headed back again to blocks that can
autonomy
untangle and are less interdependent?
Autonomy is
we thought interdependence was going to be this guarantee for worldwide peace.
Autonomy is not autarky, and we have allies, and I think it is really the times that we make sure that our values and our interests are coming together. They are integrated, and mainly with the US, I would say. There is a move forward to redesign that, because I think through the years, the common interests have diverged, even if the values were there. So it is time to look at the world as it is and to redefine how we can keep this global autonomy while keeping the relationship with other countries.
Angente, we heard the president of Ukraine very bluntly say that those who continue to import oil and gas from Russia will, in effect, have blood on their hands. We saw that BP and Shell have left. Total, the French oil giant, says for now it's staying.
He's the one who receives the bombs on his head, so he has the right to say so. On our side, we need a little bit of time just to make sure that all European countries do agree all together. If you look into how France is dependent on Russian gas, is not as much as it is in Slovakia or it is in Germany. So all these countries have to think about, and Germany has already moved and said that maybe we should consider stopping purchasing gas from Russia. It takes a little bit of time, but I'm sure we will move to that, and that will be very definitely a surprise to Mr. Putin.
Should Total leave Russia?
Yes. Maybe. Why not? Why not? Actually, many French companies are at least having their own employees coming back to France, and working now with Russia would be quite difficult, more and more difficult. Yes, maybe Total has to step back from Russia. It is not its major market, by the way. So yes, this should be considered.
Olivier Dorcans, the president of Total this Monday, saying that Europe does not have the liquefied natural gas import capacity to substitute the loss of Russian gas. Your thoughts on that?
My thoughts, as was already explained today, is the fact that we are looking at solution. I think the reason that sanctions on the energy sectors were not imposed as swiftly as in other sectors was because of our high dependence, which was highlighted by Patrick Pouyanné, the president of Total, this morning. But that being said, we are now in preparation for the reserve for next winter. There's already been support offered by the Americans to export some of their shale gas to Europe. We also have support from the Emirates as well, who have offered to supply. We have support from Algeria as well. So I think it takes a bit of time. I think a critical assessment needs to be made to be able to ensure the continuity of services to European customer. And that's also probably one of the reasons, aside from the fact that we will move out of winter into spring, where we know that the consumption of gas is much lower, as well as the consumption of oil. That will give us time to look at our dependency, to rethink our dependency, and to also be ready for sanctions which are maybe going to last for months, if not years to come.
And Gente, when you think back to the sanctions of 2014 and you look ahead to the summit that's going to take place Friday at Versailles, hosted by the French president, what needs to be done?
President Putin has to understand that the cost of his war has to be the highest. And that's what European countries are moving on. The price, he has to pay the highest price. And in return, it is true that there is also an impact on our daily lives. But I heard already some French people saying, I'm ready to have my heat lower in my house. I'm ready to pay my gas maybe a bit higher. I'm ready to pay maybe my bread or my mortgage a little bit higher. We are ready for that because Putin has to pay the highest price for his war.
We're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Anne Gente, for being with us. General Jean-Paul Paloméros, Olivier Dorgans, Marcin Zaborowski in Warsaw. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.